Okay, as sad as I hate to see us leave Hoover and move on, we are going to move on to um, Franklin Roosevelt. Um, Franklin Delano Roosevelt is what he is most known by, and his nickname is just simply FDR. There are a few others. The New Dealer, and we'll talk more about the New Deal, is his policy is the name of what he called all of his policies that he put in place to kind of help the Depression. But that would be one name. But FDR is usually what most people say because that's what he goes by, but it's still a nickname. Uh, Look at the terms 1933 to 1945. It's the longest one. This is before there was a limit to 2 terms. And he actually was elected 4 times, but he died at the very beginning of his 4th term. And you only see 3 vice presidents here because John Gardner was vice president during his first 2 terms. So John Gardner twice, Henry Wallace, and then Harry Truman. And Harry Truman, then we know him as the next president. So he becomes president next. Um, I put a picture of the president with his dog Fala on the front because Fala was almost just as popular as I believe it's her master, and the dog went everywhere with him and was very, very popular, and he loved the dog. It's even buried next to him um, at his home in New York. Um, Now, today we're going to talk mostly about the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt. Um, just like I did with Lou Hoover, I kind of did a day of Lou Hoover because I was learning so much information, but I knew I was going to do a full day of Eleanor Roosevelt because she had so much that is about her that I couldn't do her in just part of a lecture. She deserves her own lecture, and I wanted Lou Hoover to have one too. So she got her full day as well. But now we're going to do Eleanor Roosevelt today, and then we'll do personal on Franklin Roosevelt. These people take up so much of the history of our country and really even kind of recent, what we would call more modern history. Um, and she plays a part in some of our state's history too, and we'll get to that in a minute. Um, when lots of people think about FDR, they immediately think of Eleanor also. And Eleanor did just as much on her own as really as First Lady. When I think about FDR and Eleanor in the White House, I really think about FDR doing his thing and Eleanor using every power and every ability she has to do what she wants to do. She's not just supporting him, which is interesting because even though Lou Hoover, I liked her so much and she did so much, everything she did supported what her husband liked and thought was important. And everything that she did just complimented him. And I think that's beautiful. I just think that looks so cool together. That what they did just supported each other so much. Eleanor and FDR seem to it's just separate. Like she is a power on her own and she has her own thoughts on what she wants to get done, and that's what she's going to do. And so it wasn't like she was coming alongside and supporting him. It was almost like she had her own agenda, her own thoughts about what she wanted to accomplish. But let's go back to the beginning of her life. She was a shy, awkward child. She was raised in a very wealthy family. We talked some about Theodore Roosevelt before. Theodore Roosevelt's brother, Elliot, is Eleanor's father. Okay? And so remember how wealthy Theodore Roosevelt was raised? Same thing. Elliot was wealthy, and so was his family. And he married into wealth with his wife. And he had this beautiful socialite wife who loved to party, and she was beautiful. And she often called Eleanor's mother often called her Granny because of just she wasn't as beautiful and acted like an old lady, I guess. And she was just shy and a little bit awkward. Um, by the time she was 9, both of her parents had died. Her mom died when she was about 6, and then her dad died a few years later um, from alcoholism. He just couldn't, he had such a struggle with it, and it eventually just took his life. Um, and so she was sent to live with a very formal, kind of cold grandmother. So she was taken care of, and again, she still had wealth, but she basically was by herself. Um, wasn't shown a lot of love and care from that point on. Um, but I put a picture of her and her dad here because she loved her dad. She was so close to her dad, and they had such a good relationship. Even when he was gone a lot, he was gone, and he would come and visit, and then he would leave again, and then his family tried to help him by putting him in hospitals that would try to help him, but nothing really helped. Um, as a teenager, she was sent to a girls' school in England and had a very influential teacher who was a French lady who really tried to instill in these girls the importance of doing good in the world. And she would take these rich girls who had come to her from these very wealthy families and take them out into to work with the poor people of society, and really started instilling in them that they could use what they had to the good of um, of society. And Eleanor really took that to heart. She learned from this teacher. She loved her almost as if, almost like a mother or an aunt, just respected her very much. And that shows again how influential just that a teacher can be. And anyone, if you decide to invest and help someone that you could possibly make a difference in their lives that would last for a long time. So when Eleanor comes back to the States, she becomes very active in the progressive movement. So, in this movement, helping very poor people. Remember, right in the middle of the Gilded Age, when you had rich people having wealth, 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 wealth. Then you had the poor, 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 the immigrants who were living in houses with no running water, and who had absolutely nothing, and who the children were going out and working every day and making pennies for their family. The newsboys on the corner shouting to sell their penny paper so that they could take something home to their families. And this is what Eleanor came home to, and this is what she wanted to do something about. So she visited those tenement buildings and those settlement houses and checked on their conditions to see what needed to be improved. She was kind of like an inspector, okay? Someone going in to see what needs to be changed, what needs to be improved, where are these that are just absolutely so bad that no one should be living in them at all. And so she also began holding little classes and doing what she could to help people in those poor neighborhoods. Now imagine how torn she would be from some of her family or some of her richer friends that would think that, why are you doing this? You're not doing the social things that you should be doing at the time. But she did both. And she was influenced by some of her friends to help in other ways, and she influenced some of her friends. Um, this was the time that um, President Wilson's first wife, Ellen, remember when I told you that she took a lot of people on a tour of the really bad tenement houses in D.C. and showed them just how bad it was? One of the people she took was Eleanor Roosevelt. And Eleanor Roosevelt's eyes were open through that and wanted to help during that. When she was 20, she married her distant cousin. They were like fifth cousins once removed or something. Franklin. So they both had the same last name. She was a Roosevelt, he was a Roosevelt. And they married, and in her wedding, former President Theodore Roosevelt gave her away at the wedding. You know how the dad usually walks his daughter down the aisle and the preacher says, "Who gives away the bride?" And he says, "Her mother and I do." Well, she didn't have a dad. Her dad had died already. And so Theodore did that for her. After they married, she still continued to have her influence, but she also became a mother and became in charge of her own family. She had one daughter and four sons. One son died before he was a year old, so four lived to be adults. She some of the things that she did even before Franklin became president was that she worked to get Congress to improve the hospital for former sailors. FDR was the Secretary of the Navy, and someone working with him asked her to go and look at these hospitals that were being built for the sailors, and were they doing their job? Were they caring for these men in the appropriate way, especially the men that were having problems in their minds instead of their bodies? And she did a report to Congress and really pushed Congress to get some, to improve those hospitals for those men. Okay, now here she comes as First Lady. As First Lady, so we already have this very active, very progressive woman coming into the White House. And I want to back up a little, or I want to skip ahead and come back, because I mentioned something on this slide, and it actually happens backwards. So I want to kind of fix my error here. I say on this slide that she created a business with friends called Val Kill to give jobs to people making handcrafted furniture. Okay, so let me back up a little bit. When she got married, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's mother, Sarah, was very involved. She even bought their first house and had it all furnished and had their house built right next to hers with a door that she could come through and come in their house anytime she wanted. And she basically told Eleanor what to do with her children, that she needed to raise them this way, that she needed to feed them this, that she needed to do this. She was really, really active. And it was really hard for Eleanor in those early days to know what to do and how to figure this out. And eventually, she learned to assert herself a little bit. And when they moved and had a bigger house in New York, Franklin put aside this land up on the property a little bit just for her, because Sarah was in the house and Sarah was so controlling that there were times that Eleanor just needed to get away. And she would go to this little house up on the property, and it was by a little river called Valkill. And in the 1920s, she and some friends decided that they were going to take some of this land on this property and make a factory out of it. And they were going to hire people, and they were going to start this business in making handcrafted furniture. And they did it to provide jobs for people. They were not looking to make money. They were looking to give money to people and create jobs where there were not jobs. And it was a kind of experiment for her and her friends. And it lasted 20s and then 30s. And then I think mid 30s it shut down because people were not buying handcrafted furniture. It was too expensive. And so too many people in the 30s couldn't afford it. And so their factory, not really factory, but their business shut down. But I wanted to say that because that was something before she went into the White House. And I want to back up to this picture. I put this picture on here because this is Eleanor. This is Franklin. And guess who's in the middle? Sarah, Franklin's mother. Okay. And you see her in a lot of the pictures, um, especially of their young married life. Okay. So coming into the White House, she became a spokeswoman for civil rights, so for African Americans and being treated equally, for organized labor, so for like the unions and for people getting paid equally and fairly, for the poor, and for women. She held press conferences, she traveled, she gave lectures. Like I said, she was her own. This is what she wanted to accomplish, and she did it. Um, she always seemed just as active and involved as the president. She had her own thoughts, and she accomplished so much. And there were some people, she has a lot of critics because there are many people that think she overstepped a line somewhere, that she was just too active. She was doing too much. She was trying to be president. And she had a lot of critics. But this is what she dedicated her life to, and it's what she did. And she just plugged her ears to the critics. She resigned. This is really cool. Remember, DAR stands for Daughters of the American Revolution, and they're a really prestigious group, meaning they have a lot of, it was a big social group at the time. And if you were a wealthy woman in society, it did well for you to be in this group. And she was First Lady. And they refused to let Marian Anderson, that's her right here on the screen, she was a black opera singer, sing at their building. And when they did that, because they had a policy that said no, something about no African Americans performing. And so they would not change their minds. Eleanor Roosevelt resigned as First Lady from the DAR. Now, that's a big deal because as First Lady, everything you do is watched, and you're very careful not to show whether you agree or disagree with something. She didn't care. They didn't let this person sing. She resigned from their group. I don't care about your group. I'm not going to be a part of a group that's going to do that. She gave a concert, and so she worked to try to get Marian Anderson to sing in front of the Lincoln Memorial. And I would look that up on YouTube, okay? I'll send you a link. Marian Anderson sings in front of the Lincoln Memorial. And it's beautiful. I'll share that in a minute. Okay. She wrote a daily newspaper called My Day, and I have this book of the My Day articles. She wrote it from 1936 to 1962, and they're pretty short articles. They just tell a little bit. This one's actually about Marian Anderson. My husband and I had a rare treat Wednesday night in listening to Marian Anderson, a colored contralto, which is a singer, who has made a great success in Europe and this country. She has sung before nearly all the crowned heads and deserves her great success, for I have rarely heard a more beautiful and moving voice or a more finished artist. She sang 3 Schubert songs and finished with 2 Negro spirituals, one of which I had never heard before. And that's her column, okay? She's just giving a little bit about their day. This one is about Helen Keller. Last night's meeting of the National Library for the Blind was quite an inspiring occasion. Miss Helen Keller's efforts for those who are similarly affected and her willingness to give of herself was a very touching sight. So she just, she has all of these articles, and sometimes she talks more seriously and some not. She talks about being like a fish in a fishbowl because she's First Lady and being watched all the time, and she talks about that in one of her articles. Okay, here's where she connects to West Virginia. She came to West Virginia and visited, and she was appalled at the horrible conditions that she saw with the children and how they lived and the mines and just how little that they had. And so she has this idea to start this kind of project, and it was titled the Reedsville Project, and it was in a town called Arthurdale. And so what happened is she got the government to buy up all of this land in Arthurdale and build a school, hire the teachers, build factories so that they would have jobs, and build houses. And it was all government money. It wasn't personal money, and it wasn't the money of the people. It was government money for this one town. Then they accepted applications for who would live in this town. And then they chose according to people that they thought would work or had needs. And then the people were given gardens in their beside their homes to run for their own food. They were given jobs in the factories. The kids went to the schools. And these people, when they had a problem, they would call the First Lady directly. Our school bus broke down. They called Eleanor Roosevelt. And Eleanor would take it to Congress and say, we need money for this. And eventually they got a little bit tired of this because it was all of this money, I think millions of dollars, being spent in this one town. And that is not really the way our government works. Our government is the way that our system is supposed to be is that the government allows us to work and provide on our own, but it doesn't buy our houses. It doesn't hire our teachers. The state takes care of that. But she, in some ways, overstepped some boundaries here by the federal government getting involved. And it was a little bit of an experiment that a lot of people were very concerned about, that didn't think a lot about it. She had a little bit of a similar project in Eleanor, not as big as Arthurdale, but Eleanor, right where Kate Maddox, you live in Eleanor. That is named after Eleanor Roosevelt because it was a similar place where the government bought up land and had some little houses built and created some jobs for some people. She was a champion for African American rights and served on the board of directors of the NAACP. And the NAACP is National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And it's still around today. It gives scholarships to African American students, and it helps in continuing their rights and their recognition. And she was a board member on that, not being an African American herself, which is interesting. During World War II, FDR, we're going to talk about this tomorrow, FDR develops polio earlier in his life before he becomes president and becomes mostly paralyzed. Well, he can't get around and travel as easily as a well-bodied person could. And so Eleanor does a lot of his traveling for him during World War II. And she goes overseas a lot, and she's his eyes and ears and legs, visiting soldiers and foreign countries and reporting back to him on the conditions that she saw on the field. After FDR dies, she continued on. She moved back to their house, but continued to live in the Valkill cottage. Truman, who's the next president, appoints her to be the very first U.S. delegate to the United Nations. Isn't that cool? The very first delegate we had to the United Nations, which is kind of what Wilson wanted with the League of Nations. It's a group of all kinds of countries that get together to solve world problems. And our first one was a former First Lady and a woman. It was Eleanor Roosevelt. That's cool. Every summer, 150 boys from a school for troubled boys would visit her at her house and have picnics and games on her property, and she would read to them. She died in 1962, and she was called the First Lady of the World. Everyone mourned her passing because this was someone who didn't just seem like she was the First Lady of the United States, she was the First Lady of the world. And for a long time, she had lasting influence. And then I have a few pictures here for you and quotes. Here's two of her quotes that I like. No matter how plain a woman may be, because she was not known for her beauty and she was often made fun of about it when she was younger, even by her mother. But no matter how plain a woman may be, if truth and loyalty are stamped on her face, all will be attracted to her. How beautiful. I love that. Makes me a little bit teary eyed. No one can make you feel inferior without your permission. No one can make you feel inferior without your permission. That means that when you make yourself feel less, when you feel less than you are, it's not because someone else said something ugly about you. It's because you allowed yourself to feel that way. Okay, remember what I've said about knowing who you are? So who cares if my shoes are ugly? If I'm a creation of the God of the universe and you're going to call my shoes ugly, it's not going to hurt my feelings, right? Okay, and here's a few. This is a statue dedicated to her in D.C. and another one. And then this is at their home. We went there, and maybe I'll show you some more pictures of that tomorrow. But this is a statue of them that I really liked at their home in New York. Okay, let me know what was most interesting to you. Let me know a question that comes to mind, an opinion about her, if you have one. What do you think about Eleanor Roosevelt? Do you think she overstepped her boundaries? Do you think she used her responsibility well? What do you think? She's an interesting lady, and I would encourage you to find out even more.